Question. Hi Kim. I would often hear a lot about the emotional body, of how it causes diseases, etc., which is true as it is about the physical. I've explained. Everything is an energy continuum, and so our minds are really energy fields, and the lowest level of the mind is the physical, the brain. Above that in vibration is the emotional mind or the emotional body. Above that the mental, and then the highest level of our lower minds is the identity level. Beyond that, in the spiritual realm, we have our spiritual selves, our higher selves. Can you also speak of the mental body? The idea that perhaps it is one's mental body that needs more direct attention out of all the other bodies, like it is the root cause. For example, I would get an anxious thought of an intrusive thought, either out of nowhere or out of my skewed interpretation of a particular external event. Then said thought would generate emotions of fear, and then I would get some disease, get sick, etc. My question is, how do we get out of an overactive mental body? It would even come to a point where my head would hurt physically from all my thinking, or overthinking and overanalyzing, to be more precise, robbing me of precious energy. I even truly wish I can turn my thoughts off. Master Moore told us that reasoning faculties are important, but what if you are using your reasoning faculties in an imbalanced way? What is the best way to help with this? Well, so as I said, we have in the spiritual realm, which is energies that are of a higher vibration than the material world, we have our spiritual selves. Then we have the four levels of the lower mind here: the identity, mental, emotional, and physical. And if you look at people, you can see many, many people in the world, their main focus is the physical level. Their actions, their outer situation, they want, for example, money, or they want this or that or the next thing. I mean, they're very focused on the physical. Then you can see some people that are more focused on the emotional. And you actually see in the last several decades, just the 49 years I've been on the spiritual path, I can see a big shift in society where many, many more people are beginning to focus on psychology. And the first thing you often get to focus on is the emotional level. And then when you have dealt with the emotions to a certain degree, you rise up to, now you're focused on the mental, and when you have worked through certain things in the mental, you rise to the identity level. So what I'm saying is there's a sort of a progression on the spiritual path, where people who are not really that spiritual are focused on the physical, and then when people become more spiritual, they start with the emotional, work their way up to the mental, then the identity, and so forth. So I wouldn't say, as the person is saying, that it's one's mental body that needs more direct attention, like it's the root cause. No, the root cause is really your identity body, because it sets the parameters. As I've explained, the energy comes down from the spiritual self in the identity mind, based on your sense of identity in relation to the world, how you see yourself in relation to the world. And it can be very subtle. It's not just a matter of your name and origin or this and that. So the energy takes on a certain form in the identity level. So there are certain ways you think about yourself, and there may be certain things you think, oh, I'm this kind of a person, I can't do this. And this sets the parameters for what happens in your mental body. You can only think with a mental body within the parameters to find at the identity level. At the same time, what's going on in the mental body sets the parameters for the emotional body, and what happens in the emotional level sets the parameters for your actions. So what I would say to this person is simply that it sounds like you have dealt with the emotional body enough that that's not really what's driving your life. So then it's natural for you to focus on the mental. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying, don't see that as the root cause, because eventually you will also have to look at the identity body. But I of course can recognize this overthinking and overanalyzing everything. I used to be trapped in this even in childhood and for the first many years of my life. And I truly wish I could turn off my thoughts. I met many people on the spiritual path who felt that way. And the thing is, there's no quick fix to this, right? There really isn't. You have to take the long view of, say, this is part of my spiritual growth. And so I talk in several videos about the need to invoke spiritual protection from the Ascended Masters. So there's no doubt that what the person is describing there, part of this is that there's all these projections coming from the collective mind. Projecting into your mind, overwhelming your mental body with all these thoughts. And the characteristic of the mental body, and this was something that really helped me when I realized this, is that the mental body is always looking for a final argument. But it can never be achieved because in the mental body, in the analytical mind, there is no final argument. It's very, very important for me to realize that. And that means I started realizing that, gosh, my mental analysis could go on indefinitely without really getting anywhere. And you know, I have talked about this in my playlist about duality, the duality consciousness, that in duality, there are always these two opposite extremes. And they are defined in relation to each other. This means they are relative. They are relative to each other. The problem is that the ego projects that one of them is the ultimate truth and the other is the lie. And the intellect can't see through this because the intellect wants to argue that one is the ultimate truth. Like you have the old discussion between religious people and atheists, where religious people will come up with all kinds of arguments for why God must exist, and the intellectual atheists come up with all kinds of arguments for why God doesn't have to exist, and they're seeking to undermine the arguments from the religious people, and they're going back and forth. And they've been going back and forth for hundreds of years, right? So these are intellectual people that are analyzing, and they haven't reached any conclusion after hundreds of years. So when you start realizing this, you're realizing it's the same thing with your own intellect. And you are never going to think your way to any ultimate solution or realization, because as I said, we have the two extremes. The intellect can argue for one extreme and against the other. And it could come up with a lot of arguments. But the intellect can also come up with arguments for the other extreme. And if you focus on one side, these arguments will seem valid. If you focus on the other side, those arguments will seem valid. There's no way to come to some ultimate conclusion here with the intellect. So the only way out of this dilemma, because millions of people, you can see it, especially in the more developed nations, so many people are trapped in the mental body, always thinking, always analyzing. The only way out of this is your intuition. The only way. And this ties in with the teaching I've given in quite a number of talks, that we have those four levels of the mind: identity, mental, emotional, and physical. But they are designed to help us interact with the material world and other people. But this is not who we are. This is just something we have taken on in order to interact with the world. The core of our beings, who we really are, is what I call the conscious you, which is neutral awareness. And it is the conscious you that is, what should we call it? The seed of our intuition, the foundation for our intuitive faculties. Because as I've said, In order to interact with the world, the conscious you has created all these structures in the 4 levels of the mind. I call them subconscious selves or separate selves. And but the conscious you hasn't become the selves it has created. It's just like putting on an overcoat. You don't become the overcoat and you know you can take it off. The problem is that most of us have forgotten we took this on. We think this is the only way to look at the world, and therefore we don't realize we could take it off again. So the key is, and this is actually the goal of the whole spiritual path, is to expand your intuitive sense, your intuitive connection, because what can happen is the conscious you can step outside of your outer mind, including your mental mind, and you can experience your connection to a higher self or to the ascended masters. You can experience that outside this very rigid analytical aspect of your mental mind, there is an entirely different reality. And you can experience that this reality, it's not a matter of thinking, it's not a matter of analyzing. Okay? It's just a matter of experiencing. And this reality is more real than anything you can think up in your mental mind. Because, as I said, in the mental mind everything is relative. There's nothing ultimate. But the experience of something beyond the outer mind, that's ultimate compared to what we experience inside the mind. There are, of course, levels of these experiences, but what I'm saying is, everything we experience in the identity, mental, emotional, and physical levels of the mind is relative. If nothing else, relative to Earth. But what we can experience with our intuition when the conscious you steps outside of these 4 levels of the mind is not relative to Earth. Therefore, it's more real than what we experience through the filter of the mind. The mind, as I've so often said, forms this perception filter. Your mental mind is like this. Now I put on these glasses, now I have to think and analyze everything. I have to have a rational reason for why I believe this. I remember this when I was younger, I always thought, I have to be able to justify why I have this opinion. And it trips you up on the spiritual path because, okay, let's just step back a little bit. I remember when I was in my late teens, I learned this idea. There's something called the privilege of defining the problem. And this was something that was used in intellectual circles. For example, I was in my late teens, I attended a university where there was a lot of Marxists, flaming religious Marxists. And they had captured, at least in their own minds, this privilege of defining the problem based on Marxist thinking. So they were basically saying everything has to be evaluated based on the ideas of Karl Marx. And if you accept that premise, the way you look at everything is colored. Because Marx has to be right, you can't question that. But beyond that, I realized at some point, this is what the intellect does. The intellect says everything should be defined based on rational, analytical thinking. I referenced the debate between atheists and religious people. Well, many atheists are really trapped in the intellectual mind. Many religious people are too, but many atheists are, and they are saying, their main argument, if you listen to what atheists are saying, is, their main argument is, you have to be able to prove the existence of God in a way that the intellectual, rational mind can accept. So you have to come up with an intellectual argument that proves the existence of God. But what did I say earlier? There is no ultimate argument in the intellect. It's just a matter of what you focus on. So how are you going to settle the idea or the question of the existence of God? You can never settle it through the intellect, And the atheists and the religious people who are debating for centuries, they have proven this. So how can you settle it? When the conscious you steps outside the four levels of the mind, and you experience, hey, I am actually connected to something up there that's more real. That's how you settle the argument. You cannot, from inside the bubble of the intellect, come up with the ultimate argument that says there's something outside rational thinking. But the conscious you can step outside the intellect and experience that there's something outside rational thinking, and that this is more real than any argument that the rational mind can come up with. You see what I'm trying to say? It's like this, the serpent swallowing its own tail. That's the intellect. It's a closed circle. You can keep arguing and going around the closed circle, but you are never with the rational mind going to step outside the closed circle. The only way to do it is to use the conscious you's ability to step outside the closed circle, outside the rational intellectual mind, and experience, directly experience, there's a reality there. It's the same thing as you have these flat earthers who are arguing with the intellectual mind that the earth really is flat. But most people are not caught up in that because they have seen the pictures from space of the round earth. And it gave them an experience that the earth is round. It's not a matter of intellectual argumentation. It's a matter of experiencing. So I hope this helps. I know you can go a little bit further by saying that there is an enormously strong projection at us from the collective mind to be intellectual, to be rational. And there's an enormous entity or beast in the collective mind that wants us to do this, like the person is describing, to always be trapped in overanalyzing and overthinking. And as I've said, there are, two ways to overcome certain tendencies on earth. One is the school of hard knocks, where you keep overthinking to the point where you get a headache and you can't stand it anymore. But really what happens is when it becomes too much for you is that now you're reaching for something. You become open to reaching for something beyond what you've done before, beyond thinking. And that's the other solution, is you reach for something beyond the rational mind, and then you have the ability, as I said, the conscious you has the ability to step outside the rational mind and experience a reality beyond it. And the rational mind can be a really subtle trap. Millions of people are caught up in it because it becomes a self-reinforcing, self-validating system. The intellectual people, you see them in universities all over the world. My wife actually has a PhD from a university in Poland and worked at that university for some time, so she's told me about this, how these professors have this attitude. They believe they're the smartest people on earth, many of these college professors. And they do this because they're so good at using their intellectual minds. And so it gives them this sense that it's my intellect that makes me superior, and therefore they don't want to give it up. And therefore, really, really subtle trap, right? Because if you gave up the sense that the rational mind is the highest form of thinking, then your sense of superiority is threatened. And if you can't do that, if you don't want to give that up, then you're going to stay an intellectual for the rest of your life. And I realized that at some point because, I'm not really an intellectual, but I can think logically. And when I was younger, I thought, as I said, I should always be able to come up with a rational argument for my opinions. And it took me a while to overcome that. I mean, I really had to struggle with it to overcome it. But eventually, as I said, I just came to see the limitations of the intellect. So what I would say is, what you see on Earth is there are millions of people who think that because they are so good at using the intellect, they are superior to other people. But the thing is, the intellect is just a tool. It's a valid tool that's created a lot of progress in the field of science. I'm not putting it down. But the intellect is just a tool. And the person who is the best at using any tool is the person who realizes the good qualities of the tool and the limitations of the tool. And so the question really is, are you a superior intellectual person if you haven't realized the limitations of the intellect?